presentation, so we don't want phones ringing in the middle. Thank you. Again, we've had more sponsors this year than we've ever had, and there are 3 different levels. Our bronze level sponsors have contributed $100 or more, and that's Cornett Jewelers, Custom Air, Fraser Seaver Brown Funeral Service, Royal Oak Eye Care, and Dr. Paul Brown. Thank you. Our silver level sponsors are $250 or more. That's H.S. Williams, the Town of Chilhowie, and Royal Building Products of here in Marion. So thank you to them. And our gold level sponsors, $500 or more, are the Bank of Marion and Brant Saunders Insurance. So thank you very much. I'm so excited. When I went back and was going to get my master's degree, and I started doing research on the county, this was the book. Man, I grabbed this thing and went through it. And I went through the second edition and then back to the first. And they are so hard to find. I have scoured every yard sale, estate sale, garage sale for the last 20 years trying to find these books because they just aren't out there. If you've got them, you hold on to them. And we are so lucky today to have the author here. And she will sign the books, talk about how she wrote it, why she wrote it. And she did ask if you would have questions, just kind of hold them to the end so she doesn't get off track. And then she'll answer the questions for us. Yeah, it's easy to do. I do it all the time. I just go off on a tangent. So, but I'm going to let Elle introduce our speaker, and then I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, friends. Thank you so much for coming out today. And we just know how special Betsy Sayers really is, because she was worried no one would come. And she would have to do this for me. And I said, that'd be fine, because I want to hear this story. So she is going to share not only about her book, but about how this book came to be and what encouraged her to undertake this gargantuan enterprise. So I don't have to tell you people who she is. I think Betsy Sayers is one of the supreme historians of Smyth County, and we are blessed to have her here today. Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you. I see so many people here, my favorite people, and I want to thank you for coming, and I want to apologize to you if I belabor this. If you need to go, feel free to go. Most people have to work up what they do. I have to work it down, and I work very hard to try to work it down so it will be a palatable, somewhat presentation for each of you. But thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it. When Elle asked me to do this about my book, Pathfinders and Patriots, oh my goodness, I said, I'm going to cry. That was published in 1983, so I'm not too sharp on the details. Please forgive me. And I thought, nobody wants to hear about that. But the more I thought about it, number one, I didn't really have any other ideas of what I would talk about. And number two, I did get to thinking about this, that I really do have a personal story related to this book that really probably only I can tell. And I've never really publicly told it before. So I thought in terms of Pathfinders and Patriots, my personal journey. And that sounds grander than it is. But that's kind of what I thought about. And then my next thought was about you. And I thought, okay, people who would come out on a Sunday afternoon in the summer. Okay, can you hear me? I have a loud voice, but I want to scream at you. In the summertime, have to be people who are either, number one, history buffs, which I hope a lot of you are because you might enjoy this more, or people who are very interested and invested in the county and what goes on, which I appreciate so much, or you're just very kind people. And to you, I want to apologize. But anyway, or maybe a combination of all three of those things. So I got to thinking, if I'm going to take this personal journey of the journey of getting into this in the first place and the process of doing it, if I'm going to do that, then who would I rather go on this journey with than you? So I appreciate you, and I appreciate the fact that you'll go with me on this journey today. Now, part of this journey into this story is what I might subtitle The Evolution of a History Enthusiast. And some of you might can relate to that. I believe, and it's a theory, but I believe that I was born with a predisposition to relate to people and events and so forth that I did not directly experience. And that sets you up pretty well to be a person who can relate to the study of history. Now that's a theory, so we can go from there. I want to say that I did not come from a family of history buffs. Great people, but not history buffs. But I did have some experiences along the way that kind of pushed me down this path of becoming a history enthusiast. And I want to relate two of those to you today. The first one was when I was 4th grade or younger, and my family took a trip to Florida, and my parents decided to go on a tour of St. Augustine, Florida. Well, I was mesmerized. We went to Castillo de San Marcos, and I'd like to go into what fascinated me about that, but I don't have time. I drank from the waters of the fountain of youth, and I am sorry to say that at this point I cannot vouch for the efficacy of those waters, because I have continued to age since then, but hope springs eternal, and so perhaps they'll kick in eventually, who knows? So I keep waiting. But the thing that I want to particularly tell you about is about our tour of a wax museum in St. Augustine.
What guys worked on that night?
Closer.
Okay, is that better?
No.
No.
He's looking closer.
Okay. What about that? Is that okay? I know I'm going to blow some of you out of it. Some of you, like me, are still not going to be able to hear. Okay. I'm probably better to just shout because I have a really loud voice. I can't be quite shouting with this thing. Anyway, so I go to this wax museum, and I distinctly remember 3 figures or groups of figures, and I won't go into all 3 of them, but the one particularly that I want to tell you about was King Henry VIII of England and his 6 wives. Now, I was introduced at that point to the verse, Henry VIII to 6 wives he was wedded, 1 died, 1 survived, 2 divorced, 2 beheaded. Well, here sat horrible Henry, who would actually kill his own wives on his throne with these 6 wax figure women around him in all of their regalia. And there was something about those figures, even though they were wax figures and not real, that made me understand that historical figures were real people. And that catapulted me along my journey of becoming a history enthusiast. And I have been hooked on history ever since. Now, fast forward from that time to high school, my high school days 100 years ago, and I took world history. Imagine trying to take that on to teach. And I had the incredible Robert Bob Estep. Many of you may have known him and had the privilege of knowing him. Great guy, great guy. He was a brilliant young man who was between college
and law school, and I had the privilege of being in his world history class. Now, at that period of time, there must not have been a mandate as to how far up in time he had to go, because we took our time, and we took each era, and we took each civilization, and we dug deep, and I loved it. And at the end of that year, we were just getting into the Renaissance. Now, you might wonder why I love ancient and old history, where most of my history enthusiasts prefer modern history, but I love the old stuff. That experience solidified my desire to become a history teacher. And I went toward that goal with my face set. Now, most people tried to discourage me from becoming a history teacher because they said, and they were right, you will never get a job teaching history. Coaches teach history, not people like you who can't even throw a ball or anything like that. And so you might as well forget it because you'll never get a job. Well, I, with my the smart aleck person that I am, said, I would rather not teach than teach something that I'm not passionate about. So I pursued that goal, and lo and behold, I got a job teaching history to 8th graders, American history, at Marion, then junior high school, and I loved it. I loved it. Now, I had a lot of excellent history students, some of whom are still around. I had even some people who liked history. And I will say, and I'm telling the truth, that I came to love every single student that I taught. And I loved it, but because of the way things were set up then, I had a disproportionate number, on the high side, of students who really could not have cared less about school, and in general, and history in particular. So what was I going to do? I believe that the study of history is not the study of names and dates and places, but rather the study of real people doing real things in the time in which they live and the place in which they live. That time and that place influences what they can do and how they can do it. And then they, in turn, I believe, influence the time and the place in which they live. Well, how was I going to get them to see this? How was I going to give them their Henry VIII aha moment? Well, I have to confess that at that time I knew absolutely nothing about Smyth County history, nothing. I was raised by people who treasured this area and its people. I went to public school in Smyth County all of my life. I took Virginia history, for heaven's sake, but I knew nothing about Smyth County history. So I realized that many of my students had never been out of Smyth County and might never go out of Smyth County. And so I realized I had to find something here. I had to find something concrete to which they could relate. And so I started learning Smyth County history. I read Goodrich Wilson, History and Traditions of Smyth County, which is excellent. I went to every person that I could find out liked Smyth County history, and I picked their brain, and they sent me to others, and so forth and so on. And I found out that Smyth County did, in fact, have a history, and it was a darn fascinating one at that. So I was thrilled. I also wanted to find out where are places throughout the county that I could point out to my students to say, look, a real person built that, or a real person walked this ground before you. So I began to formulate a plan. Bless everybody. And I decided I was going to take my students on a tour of Smyth County and see these places. And so I had 150, 8th grade history students, and I was going to take 50 each day, a bus load around the county, and I was going to show them all these places. I planned it, those of you who know me know, I planned it down to the most minute detail. You know, I had the objectives and the goals and the procedures, all that kind of stuff that heads of education like and all that kind of stuff. And I planned it out to the nth degree. And I took it to my principal, Mr. Clay, who was not always a excited enthusiast of my big ideas, but Mr. Clay had his teacher's backs, and I will always appreciate him for that. So he said, okay, Betsy, I will take this plan to the superintendent and the school board, and I will see if they will let you do this. So I said, thank you very much, sir, and he did it, and then he called me into his office. And he said, well, Betsy, from your perspective, I have some good news and some bad news. And I said, well, what is that? And he said, they've said you can do it. Yes, they've said you could do it, but they said you cannot go on 3 days. You have to take all the students on 1 day. Well, I was very disappointed about this, and I know you think this doesn't have anything to do with the story, but it does. I was so disappointed because selfishly, and my children can tell you this, I like to be with my people. You know, I wanted to go with each one of those students. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to know if they were taking it in. I wanted to prepare them for the stop that they were going to go to. I wanted to help them process that stop when we left there. I wanted to point out things to individual kids who might be interested. And it killed me to think that I couldn't go on each one of those buses, and I couldn't. But beggars can't be choosers, and I had to accept that. And what I had to do was I had to pull back and depend on more people to help me. I had to get more teachers to come with us and do crowd control. They had to have the information about each of the stops so they could answer questions. But I also asked local historians to come with us and ride on the bus with us and talk to the kids and share their expertise. I also had contacted what the tour industry now calls local experts, and they were, to meet us at various stops and tell us about the thing that we were looking at in their area that they knew much more about than I did. So what happened is I was getting involved and getting to know the local historians of the area doing this. So we had a big old field trip planned. We went to Saltville, we went to the Salt Works, we went to the Madam Russell Methodist Church, we went to the overlook of the Battle of Saltville so we could see why did the Union soldiers want that. We talked about how the armies came through the passes there, the slaughter of the black troops during that battle, and so forth. We went to Chilhowie, and I took them down by the river so that they could see that the waters, once you get to Smyth County, flow in what direction? West. Now this is significant because if the waters flow east, you have an easy path back to civilization, back to the people you love, back to the supplies you need. But these waters flowed further into the wilderness, and that was significant. I wanted to show them how there's usually a rise right up from a river, and that's where the Native American tribes that came and used this area as a hunting ground during the time of the settlement of this area by the European settlers would come and camp on that ridge up from the river, and there was a wealth of arrowheads and pottery shards and things like that. We talked about the Chilhowie Townhouse. We went to 7 Mile Ford and looked at the grave of General William Campbell, the hero of the Battle of Kings Mountain during the Revolutionary War. And his wife, Elizabeth Henry Campbell Russell, Patrick Henry's sister, who married 2 generals and had a profound influence on this county and particularly the spiritual life of this county. We went to Adwolf and looked at the very unique and interesting octagonal house and talked about Abijah Thomas and the coming of industry into the area. We went to Marion, went to the courthouse, the county seat of Smyth County. We went to Royal Oak Cemetery and talked about the 3 intrepid young people who came out here by themselves and settled a plot called Royal Oak, which would grow and then become the basis for the town of Marion. We talked about the Civil War Battle of Marion and the very brave young Allen woman who saved the county records. I looked at them just the other day. She put out the fire that the Union soldiers started on these records, and several times. And she saved these records that we can look at them today. We talked about that. We went up to Round Hill Cemetery and saw the grave of Sherwood Anderson and talked about how Marion in the 1920s and 30s was the happening place, to the point that a very influential author would want to come and live here. We went to Atkins and talked about the Old Stone Tavern and talked about the German settlers who came into this area along with the Scotch-Irish. They were stonemasons, a lot of them, and they built these stone houses. We talked about how taverns sprung up along the Great Wagon Road that brought people out here and then further on out west. So, in my opinion, it was a great day. It was a great tour. And I will say that I think it was successful. I know I didn't make history buffs of all my students, I'm sad to say, but I do think that my kids had fun learning history that day. And I think that it opened them up a little bit more to what I wanted and needed and was contracted to teach them. So that was good. And those kids were so appreciative that they had the opportunity to do this, that people would spend their time, the county would spend their money for the buses and their meal, and that thought enough of them to do that. And they were very, very appreciative. They behaved well, and we had a great time. Well, at the end of the 1976 school year, I gave birth to my third child. And I know myself well enough to know that I am not efficient and I'm not systematic, and I will work hard, as my grandson Andy will say. Nana, you're one of these people who works hard but not smart. And he's right. And I knew that I didn't have the capacity to take care of 3 and then later 4 of my own children and 160 of someone else's. So reluctantly, very sadly, I resigned from teaching, although the good part of this was I got to spend more time with my own children, which I treasured. But I did not lose contact with the local historians, because I did at least 3 after-school enrichment classes covering Smyth County history that ended in a tour modeled after the ones I had done with my 8th graders. And so I kind of kept in touch during those years. Well, I probably need to find out where I am in my notes in case I get lost. At the same time, this group, the Smyth County Historical and Museum Society, was beginning to look towards the county's sesquicentennial, in 1982. This was 78, 79, 80. And one of the things that they had decided to do was to print a series of volumes about Smyth County history. So they had been talking, I wasn't a part of the group at that time, and they had been talking, and I guess my name came up because of knowing some of these people. So Frank Detweiler, Susan, Francis are here. Frank Detweiler came to me one day and he said, I have been authorized by the Historical Society to ask you if you would write the first volume of Smyth County history that we want to publish. Well, I'm also a kind of person that absolutely allows my enthusiasm for a project to way overwhelm any thought of the time and the effort and the cost and everything else about it. So probably with my family scratching their heads, but supporting me nonetheless. My sweet husband says, Betsy, I admire your courage, I question your judgment. But a lot of he said that many times. But I said, sure, I'll do this. The goal of this volume was to explore, to do an overview of the time period from the first arrival of explorers, hunters, trappers, traders, settlers of European extraction into the area that would become Smyth County up until the time that the county was formed in 1832. That was my job. I was to tell it from the point of view of the European settlers. Now, I began to research furiously. You gotta understand that in 1980, I did not have access to a computer. Probably if I had, I wouldn't have been able to use it. I still can't, as my family knows. But I didn't have a computer. So, and I had by this time I had 4 young children at home. So my ability to travel to the primary source material was pretty severely limited. So I began to read all the great histories of this area, Southwest Virginia, Wilson, as I mentioned, Summers, the Kegleys, Pendleton, Withers. I began to read all these books and to pay attention to their source material so that I could dig deeper. The library just was wonderful to me. I couldn't go, so they ordered book after book on interlibrary loan that I could use. I would copy the pages because I didn't get the books back so that I could check my work after they were back. There were some books I couldn't get my hands on because they were too rare, and they would get librarians in other places to copy those pages and send them to me. They would get documents and pictures and everything. They were absolutely wonderful. And I combed the archives at the county courthouse. I went to the library and looked at, see, this is what I know about technology, microfilm, I don't know what it was, but I spent a lot of times looking at machines in the library. People gave me materials to look at, and it was amazing. Well, this thing began to take on a life of its own. This is a 100-year period, and during that period, a lot of very important things were happening. For instance, we went from being colonies to being a nation, and all of that affected this area, and actually we affected what was going on in the rest of the country. And so there was a ton of things that were happening. And even if I just did an overview and did kind of a little bit, a summary of what was going on, it was going to be a lot bigger than what I think some of them had in mind, which was more of a booklet or a magazine kind of format. And I went to them and I said, you know, I don't think I can squish this down into a book any more than this. And they were very, very good about that. And so we continued. Now, 1982 began to be close upon the horizon. This was the sesquicentennial year. This is when they wanted to have it published. And people would say to me, Betsy, you have to stop reading and start writing. And I said, well, there are a lot more things I felt like I needed to know, but oh well, too bad, I had to cut that off. So I did start writing. I had taken note cards. I had taken notes on index cards of all this material, that, like the old days when we used to do term papers. A few of you may remember that. And I wanted to be very careful to note the source, the pages, and all that kind of thing, so I could go back and check my work. So I did start writing. Remember, I don't have a computer, and I'm a terrible typist. I have absolutely no manual dexterity. And so I had to have a lot of help. I had people who typed my chicken scrawl. Out of this, I wanted to be happy when I was writing, so I bought myself a 3-ring binder to put these pages in, and it had white and red checkerboard pattern on it and a big picture of a very happy Snoopy. And yes, I felt very happy when I would pick it up and start writing, which was usually, or as often as not, between midnight and 4 o'clock in the morning, because that was the most quiet time around my house. But I did start writing, and these people started helping me. Typists, people who proofread for the fine points of grammar and spelling and punctuation. I had people who proofread for content. I had the people at the library continued to help me. I had people who drew maps. I had people who were, especially using Goodrich Wilson's book, were able to locate events and places on those maps. I had so many people who helped me. Linda Lewis did illustrations and did a beautiful job trying to help people visualize these word pictures that I was trying to give them of what things were like out there. Joan Armstrong spent hours and hours of time editing, doing fine points. I'm not a detail person, and a lot of times I don't catch mistakes because I'm reading more for content. So she did a wonderful job editing the book. Well, finally, we are ready to print this thing, and that's the whole story in itself. It was quite the process, at least I know back in those days, probably still is. I learned a lot. I won't go into all that. The thing that probably was most interesting to me was what they called the blueprints. Do they still do that? I doubt it. But they were blueprints, and they were actually blue pages with the printing on it. And I had a special pen that I was supposed to note any errors that the printers had made, and also, you know, errors despite all of our proofreading and editing had gotten through, so I was able to work on those things too. I do believe the old adage that writing is 1 part inspiration and 99 parts perspiration. It's hard work. It's hard work. But anyway, the whole process was very interesting, and I learned a lot. And I had the blessing of a wonderful man named Don Mills with Walsworth Publishing, who kind of walked me through this process and was encouraging and helpful, and I'm grateful to him. I don't know if he's still alive, but I'm grateful to him to this day. The book was ready for sale in 1983. You see the problem there? I missed 1982, which I was sorry about, but it was the best I could do. And so it was ready for sale in 1983. To my shock, the book sold like hotcakes. Within a few months, we had sold out of the first printing. And I was just floored that anybody would want to read this stuff. But anyway, then we kind of went into a process because nobody had ever done this before. So we were trying to, who would want to reprint it? Would they want to reprint it? Who would want to pay for it? Who would want to take on the responsibility of selling it? What, you know, all those kinds of things we had to work out. It took us about 2 years. But finally, I reprinted it at my own expense, and I took on a sales tax account, and I took them to various retail places and banks and all these kinds of places, and they sold them graciously for me, and I'd collect the money and pay the tax, and I would take orders, and I would ship out books and all that kind of thing. And I had several boxes of books, and they sold pretty well despite the kind of loss of momentum in those years. We sold probably about over 300, I guess, and I needed more boxes of books. Well, I won't go into the whole story, but I had put them at my dad's office in the building up here that was last the Wells Fargo Bank. His office was on the 2nd floor, in a closet in his assistant's room. Well, a lot of time had passed, and he no longer had an assistant or used that room, so I go up to get these boxes, and he's like, I don't know where they are. And he said, you must have taken them. And I thought, well, you know, I am kind of ditzy, but I don't remember taking them. But nevertheless, there's about 5 boxes of books. And so I crawl around in my attic in the basement, and my parents' attic and basement, and I open every door I can look in, and every cabinet and everything else, and they were nowhere to be found. They vanished. They had vanished. I didn't like it, but there wasn't anything I could do about it. I couldn't find them. And so I gave up, and I went on to something else, which I needed to probably at that time. And I let people know that the books were not any longer available, and they weren't. So years later, I get a call. I think it might have been at the time when the bank was moving out of this building. I get this call from this lady, and she said, Betsy, I think I have your books. And I went, what? And she said, yeah, I think I have your books. And I think, really? So I go up there, sure enough, there are the boxes of Pathfinders and Patriots. And of course, by this time, I'm so past that, I don't want to get back into sales tax or mailing books or anything like that. So I kind of ignore them. I stack them up in a closet in my mom's house. And I kind of forget them, knowing that I need to do something with them. Laura and Alex, they now have my mom's house, And we kind of moved them out of the closet and into the garage, and I thought, I really need to do something with those books, and of course, you know, let time go and that kind of thing. So at the first of the year, Elle and I were talking, and I had come into possession of some things that I thought the Historical Society might be interested in. And she said yes, they might, and she would ask everybody, and she asked me if I would do this. And I said, by the way, Elle, do you have any way to sell anything? And she said, well, yeah, we do. We sell books and stuff. And I said, well, would you be interested in having some of these books? And I said, you can sell them, you can keep whatever, and for the wonderful work that you're doing here. And I've said the same thing to Diane Hayes with the Mount Pleasant Preservation Society, etc. And so we have it fixed now that these books are once again available. And they're going to handle the sales, they're going to set the prices, and all of the proceeds will go to these two very, very worthy organizations that are working so hard to preserve our county's history. So I'm really excited to be just a very small part of that. Now, in a minute, I'm going to open it up for questions and your comments, and I'm really interested in hearing those things. But I decided that first I would close with a question that you haven't asked me, but I think I'll answer anyway. And I wrote it out because this means a lot to me and I didn't want to mess it up. And the question is, what is the most heartfelt takeaway for you from this project that you did? I learned so much. I met people, fascinating people. I learned about the history of Smyth County. I learned about the people of Smyth County. I learned about the places of Smyth County. I learned what it took to research and write and publish a book. I learned a lot about myself. But probably my most heartfelt takeaway from this, and it has remained that way in the 40 years that have passed, is the deep and abiding admiration and respect that I have for the people, the men, the women, and the children who came out into this area in those early days and faced the challenges and the obstacles of surviving in that trackless wilderness and made it their home. After these 40-some years that have passed, I still feel that way just as strongly. I am in awe of their determination and their perseverance. I am amazed at their strength. First, just their raw physical strength that it took to cut down huge virgin forests, to cut those logs up and make themselves a home, then to clear a patch of ground, root it with all those roots, can you imagine? And plant your first crop of corn so that you could have bread, so that your family could survive during the winter. To give birth to babies out in this wilderness with so little help, to feed them and clothe them and protect them, to find and have on hand water to survive. And it was not just physical strength. It was emotional, mental, and spiritual strength as well, to withstand the leaving of everything they knew and most of the people that they loved, who served as their support system, to face the deprivation and the loneliness and the fear. My mind is blown away by their courage. And I'm not being overly dramatic when I say that. The dangers of their daily, the ever-present danger of their daily lives. Threats from their natural surroundings, from the elements, from animals, from fire. And while I have every sympathy for the plight of the Native Americans during this period of time and on, and they faced the same horrors, but it was harder because they were losing their land instead of obtaining it. But still, that doesn't negate the threat and the danger to these settlers of European extraction who came here. The Indian raids were horribly brutal. and they happened at a moment's notice as they set upon these isolated frontier settlement. I can sort of understand people coming out there themselves. I have a really hard time understanding how they could bring their children and subjecting them to this danger, but you have to understand that they were coming out here to make a better life for themselves, for their children, for their children's children. They wanted a piece of their own land to work, to live their lives in freedom and with a small amount, as much as humans can have, of control over their own lives. Now, it would be a mistake and a disservice to these people to idealize them. They were human beings with human weaknesses and frailties and a mixture of honorable traits and bad ones. To put them on a pedestal robs them of the amazing accomplishments that they did in the face of their very real humanity. Many survived these hardships, at least for the normal lifespan back then. Many did not. But it's like soldiers who charge against an artillery line. Many fall. But they enable others to surge forward and to accomplish their common goals and objectives. Yes, my most important and impactful takeaway from this experience is my respect for them and my gratitude to them for making it possible the creation of this place that would become the home that has nurtured me since my childhood. I am proud of my heritage as a Southwest Virginian and as a citizen of Smyth County. Thank you for going on this journey with me today. And I think at this time, they're okay with me opening the floor to questions and comments and your opinions and so forth. Yes?
Betsy, you did a lot of research, read a lot, and I'm impressed by that. But I wonder, you also talked about stories and the impact that stories had on you. Is there a particular story that you learned in your research that is fun for you to tell, that became a story that you like to tell about some of our forebears?
Well, yeah, and one of the things that was interesting is a lady from my church came to me one day with a cardboard gift box with a rubber band around it. I don't know if any of you remember Miss Margaret Atkins. What a lady, what a lady. Well, she's the one that shinned down the tree when she was up in her 70s when she got locked in her attic. She was something. But she was something. But she had in her attic this box which contained handwritten letters from Arthur Campbell, who was one of the 3 young people who came out to the Royal Oak settlement, to his daughters. And she handed them to me. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have in my hands a treasure. And so I use them. They're printed in an appendix of this book because they were fascinating. And it does show you a little bit about the kind of personality of some of these people. Not perfect, but really great. I had a lot of things like that, and I guess I got the closest to the Campbell family because I had more primary source material, and that's probably some of the stories that I might be the fondest of, yeah.
You mentioned the Native Americans. Did you find any families here who still had a connection back home that they could trace that lineage? Did you have anybody?
You know, I know there are a lot of them, my husband's family being one. I did not talk in relationship to this book to people who went back to their Native American heritage. And for one reason, that was not in the purview of my assignment. I'm fascinated with what happened in that area of history, but that was not
job. But there are still people in this area whose families have lived here all these years, you know that, who have that connection with the Native American populations of this area, particularly Cherokee, I would say, who live to the south. Yeah.
Is there another goal on the horizon? 7 years.
Fountain of Youth, baby.
You what?
Fountain of Youth.
Well, better kick in quick. Yeah. Not really. I'm kind of interested. I've got a lot of genealogical material, and I'm kind of interested in going into that. Right now, I am enjoying. I have 3 of my daughters who are living here now, and their families, well, some of their family members, and I'm having a great time enjoying them and hanging out with them, and kind of that's, I'm not a huge goal-oriented person, and so, you know, kind of what falls into my lap is kind of what I tend to do. By the way, as far as the objective that the Historical Society had, in addition to that, I had just been through trying to learn Smyth County history, not knowing where to start. And I had just been teaching kids Smyth County history. So part of what I had as a personal goal was to tell the story, but to be diligent to make sure the sources were noted, so that if anybody had a particular area of interest, they could use this book as a springboard. So I'm avoiding your question. So at this point,
2032.
oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Well, I'm sure there are people here who would do a great job. Anyone else?
Tell us a little bit about the Lincoln family, because I know you go back to the Lincoln.
Okay, yeah, my grandmother was a Lincoln. The Lincoln family was not among the early settlers of this area, but I do like to point out that they came before the Civil War from Massachusetts. They were not carpetbaggers, although I'm sure there were some fine people that did that, but they came into the area. Coming from Massachusetts, they had a real feel for manufacturing. And so they were kind of the right people at the right time in this area. As a matter of fact, we have a letter from my great-great-grandfather who took the journey down here from Massachusetts, stopped in Washington, D.C., and was just terribly shocked that the people there were not paying any attention to each other. You know, hopefully there were committee meetings going on, I don't know, but, okay, well, I've lost my train of thought. But anyway, he said that he made a comment, something to the effect as, you know, in Massachusetts, there would be a mill on every single section of this stream. And so I think they saw opportunities here. They started very humbly over in Rich Valley, Saltville area at a farm that they rented. They made broom handles, they made hats, they made cheese boxes and made cheese. They moved over here, I think, because of the access to the railroad, and then got into plow handles, wagons, and so forth. And then it kind of went on from there. Yes, that's a topic for another day.
I might be wrong, but Smyth County was formed from Wood County and Washington.
You are exactly
Can
correct.
you tell me why?
Well,
Betsy,
yeah.
would you mind repeating what
Okay.
she said?
Okay, she was saying, and she's right, that Smyth County was formed from Wythe County and Washington County. And why was that? Also, before then, there was Fincastle County and Montgomery County and Orange County, and those were the places I couldn't go with poor children. But all of those have records that are about this area. I assume that the population and the territory got large enough that it was, in that time of transportation, it was a little harder to get to the county seats. And so they carved out this kind of central section from parts of Wythe and parts of Washington County. Yeah.
This is just a comment, but I was never interested in history until I got into genealogy.
Okay.
And then when I started looking at my own family history, it wasn't the dates and things like you were talking about. It was more like, you know, what did these people go through? What was it like living here? You know, where did they come from? What did they leave behind? And that really put me on a journey to be interested in this area, Smyth County, Grayson County. And, you know, it amazes me that we live here, and so many of us, myself included, had absolutely no idea. When I was a kid, I like going to Civil War sites, Gettysburg, and, you know,
Yeah.
places.
Oh, yeah.
I never realized that I grew up in Wasona Park, and they were probably running through Wasona Park, and, you know, for the Battle of Marion.
Absolutely.
And so I find that really fascinating, and I think that when people make the connection, like you're talking about helping people make, that, you know, this wasn't all Jamestown and Williamsburg, and, you know, there was a whole other history that was going on, and it was going on here with names that are familiar to all of us. If we go back far enough, we'll recognize a few of these
Your
last
aha
names.
moment where you connected with the past being real.
Yeah, and that's what made it real for me, because, you know, I didn't really, when I took history, it seemed, it was very much, you know, 1865, you know, this happened in this battle, and, you know, bivouacs and flanks, and, you know, all these things that
Yeah.
I still don't understand. But that didn't really interest me, so
Mhm.
I think that what you try to do with the students and everything is that's the kind of stuff that needs to be done.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And questions at the end of chapters? Didn't you hate them? I hated them.
Yeah, and we're about ready to close, I think. But I'll stay here as long as he moves.
Okay, mine could be online.
No, no.
It's a detail. Did you encounter in your research specifics about the Campbell, the first Campbell, and the mill that was on the middle fork of the Holston, the location of it? The Garden Club is working on the upper end of the river walk and would like to be able to mark that as a historical point for the town. Did you ever encounter?
John, can we pinpoint that, you think?
Deer in the headlights.
I'm sure that can be, I don't know right off the top of my head. Remind me of that.
Okay.
And we'll see what we can find out.
If we knew who owned it specifically, we could look up a deed
Yeah.
and have a better idea.
The place that Bill Huber's working on now, which was the Lincoln factory, was originally a Snavely mill on the river there with a dam and everything. My grandmother and my dad's cousin remembered falling in it at one point in their lives. So yeah, I think we could find it. This is great research right here. Grab hold of it. So, anything else? Close. Okay. Yeah, that's me.
Oh, did you
That's
ever
me.
have a student come back and say, I am now a history teacher because of you? Or science teacher, or just in general, did you have any come back? You would have made a huge impression on me.
I don't know. I don't, not really. No. I know some of you need to go. Let's turn it back over.